Hi, today we're going to be talking about endangered species, and we're going to be focusing on what are some of the main causes for species endangerment and extinction, as well as what are some of the US and international protections that we are trying to provide for these animals. Before we get started, I wanted to reintroduce you to the woolly mammoth, which is a North American favorite to kind of touch on. Woolly mammoth lived at a time where there were some other megafauna, meaning really large animals. You might be thinking about the saber-toothed tiger, but you might not know that there used to be something called a giant sloth, which is amazing. And there even were animals that are related to what we know today as the camel in North America. So thinking about why don't we see those animals anymore is something that we're going to touch on later. So here are the notes for this video. Feel free to pause here. So something that we need to sort of establish is that the scientific community has a consensus that around 99% of species that have ever lived on planet Earth are already extinct. And much of that has happened before humans even were part of the picture. And there are about 2 million named species on planet Earth currently, but it's important to recognize that that number is a low ball because we don't know what we don't know. And if we look to the oceans, for example, they cover 70% of the Earth, and they are 90% of it is so deep that we've never seen explored. We don't know what's going on. So whenever we send down vessels, they come back up, and there are usually new things that we've never seen before. So there are 2 million named things, but much of that is limited because we don't know what we don't know. Are we in the midst of a sixth mass extinction? Just to remind you, our previous mass extinction was the one that took out the dinosaurs, so a big asteroid that hit planet Earth and wiped out pretty much everything, but not everything. This was helpful. It kind of cleared the room for mammals to come forward, which is good for us. And then the four previous to that are pretty similar in that they wipe out almost everything. But the things that are left are under the pressures of natural selection and through speciation, we get new species. So this sixth one, it's not official, but it's been kind of colloquially deemed as the Anthropocene. So this is a time that is characterized by the amount of human impact. So anthro meaning human, and then Pocene is about like that time period. And I also want to touch on that our current extinction rates are about 100 to 1,000 times higher than the background rate. And that is why we're kind of deeming this a possible sixth mass extinction due to human interaction. So thinking back to the woolly mammoth and the giant sloth, where did they go? So the earliest humans crossed the Bering Strait a very long time ago, and we can follow their trail. So remember that Bering Strait is from northeast Russia and connects to Alaska. And when really cold conditions prevail, there is a frozen land bridge, and that's how they can cross. And so we actually know where they traveled because behind them they left a trail of bones of the things that they ate that became fossilized into our fossil records. So it's actually pretty interesting to see exactly what came through. So this is kind of showing you that we have, as humans spread across the world, we took out a lot of the megafauna. It's not something specific to North America. It's happening, or it happened everywhere. We have a history of perhaps unsustainably harvesting animals, and so we've seen that a lot of our megafauna have gone due to overhunting or non-sustainable practices that we've kind of enacted over a long period of time. Something interesting to note, though, is that on the continent of Africa, we actually see the least amount of megafauna lost. So what are some of the big causes? I want to give you a tool. That tool is hippo. Not that hippos have anything to do with all of our endangerment. They're so cute, but very dangerous. So I hear. It's a mnemonic device that I hope will help you remember some of the major causes. So H is for habitat destruction. This is like number one, what you should have in your pocket on an AP test. that most animals are endangered because the places where they live or their territories in which they interact are being damaged or limited or wiped out. I for invasive species. Invasive species frequently have an advantage over native species. Maybe that advantage is that they reproduce faster than the native ones, or maybe they have a wider range of tolerance and they can withstand different conditions. Those make them better competitors, and so they can wipe out native species. P for pollution, we're talking about toxins in the environment, and we see this particularly in amphibians. Amphibians are very sensitive and are some of the species that are most endangered. Amphibians breathe partially through their skin, which is always in contact with the environment, and so we can see that they're particularly sensitive to things like pollution, and so they ultimately also become more endangered more quickly, and we lose them faster. The other P for population pressure from humans, thinking about how humans spread into different areas, and they use the areas for resources or recreation or all of these different things. And then O for overexploitation, and we're thinking poaching here, so that's the word for illegal hunting of animals. And a lot of these things kind of go together. So habitat destruction and poaching kind of took out the American alligator, and so that, well, they didn't take them out, actually, it's a little bit of a success story. But those were the main causes for endangerment. So it's usually not just one thing, it's usually many things, but habitat destruction is definitely a primary. But this acronym HIPPO does not kind of account for climate change. So when I say climate change, I'm talking about how areas are getting warmer, areas with water that are getting warmer are getting more humid, and those might be pushing out animals where their range of tolerance doesn't allow them to be successful there, and so they have to move or migrate, and not all animals can move or migrate as easily as others. And then we have plants, which have a limited range as well. So if we add C into this acronym, maybe HIPPOC, or my preferred CHIPPO. So this might be a way for you to remember what are the different causes of endangerment. So we have some laws that are here to protect our species. The big one is the Endangered Species Act, ESA, and that was developed in 1973, and it was there to protect species and their habitats, which is super important to recognize, and that and their habitats becomes a point of contention sometimes for communities that are utilizing those areas for different needs. So you saw in our discussion around lithium mining and this endangered buckwheat, there's also an endangered snail that's found there. And so when we can use that land for economic gain, it puts industry at odds with conservation. And there's another example, this great northern spotted owl in redwood forests in Northern California and in Oregon halted the logging community in that area. And especially when you get communities that are their identity and their history is entrenched in a particular industry, like it is for this community in Northern California, it really is inflammatory, and it kind of becomes extra complicated to preserve species like this owl, which is actually also an indicator species. It only lives in these old growth forests. So when we start to see those reducing in numbers, it becomes problematic. There's another law, an international convention, the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species. It's called CITES. Sometimes you might hear it called CITES. Also 1973. And it's a ban on international trade of endangered species, which is certainly a really good thing. Oftentimes endangered species are shopped around because they're rare, and so that rarity is something that people are looking after. And so for thinking back to amphibians, there's a lot of trade on these endangered frogs. They look really cool, these poison frogs. They're super bright colors. There's a lot of work to see how can we reduce this, the existence of this illegal trade of endangered species, which on a black market still exists. And there was this really interesting podcast on Planet Money about supply. I think it's called Supply, Demand, and Extinction. And it's about this scientist in Colombia, and he tries to breed in captivity these endangered species of frogs so that he can sell them and kind of flood the market with this essentially lab grown frog. And then he's thinking, well, what if I create a super rare frog? So I genetically modify my own new species. It's a really interesting podcast. I would definitely give it a listen. But ultimately, I think to protect species, we need a multifaceted or multi-pronged approach. We need legal protections, we need education, and we need to make sure that there are economic opportunities in areas where there are endangered species so that we reduce the incidence of people trying to profit off of these endangered species, either for selling the animal or even parts of the animal sometimes are used for economic gain. Thank you so much for watching this video, and like and subscribe for more.